All right, strap in, everyone, because today we're taking a deep dive straight into the Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 4.
Yeah, this one's pretty intense.
It is. We've had some amazing listener questions about this chapter, and it seems like everyone is really grappling with this concept of Jnana Yoga, the
Yeah.
path of knowledge.
It's a big one. It's like a crash course in ancient Indian philosophy, all packed into this one chapter.
Right, and to make things even more interesting, it's all happening on a battlefield.
Oh, yeah, totally. Don't forget the context here. We've got Arjuna, this warrior, totally freaking out because he's about to fight his own family.
Talk about a family reunion you want to avoid.
Right. And then you've got Krishna, his charioteer, who also happens to be an avatar of Vishnu, basically a god in disguise.
Yeah, that's not something you see every day.
Definitely not your average Uber driver. So Arjuna's all like, what's the point of all this action if it just leads to suffering? And Krishna's like, hold up, let me drop some wisdom on you. And he starts by saying that he's actually taught this yoga countless times before, starting way back with Vivaswata, the Lord of Light himself.
Hold on. If Krishna is talking to Arjuna and saying he taught this ancient wisdom, but Krishna was born more recently, how does that even work?
That's where things get really trippy. Krishna explains that both he and Arjuna have been born many times. This is the concept of reincarnation, a huge idea in Hinduism and Buddhism.
Mind blown. So they both live multiple lives, but
But here's the kicker. Krishna, being a divine being, remembers all of his past lives. Arjuna, not so much.
that would definitely make for some awkward small talk. Hey, remember that time we were both, oh wait, you don't.
Talk about an uneven playing field. But this revelation about reincarnation really sets the stage for Krishna's whole teaching in this chapter.
Okay, so reincarnation, got it. But how can a god be born over and over again? Doesn't that kind of contradict the whole idea of being eternal and unchanging?
It does, unless you factor in the concept of Maya, which is often translated as illusion. It's not that the world isn't real, but it's like a veil over the true nature of reality. So Krishna is using this Maya to take on a physical form, even though his true self is actually unborn and undying.
So it's like he's putting on a costume to play a role in the world drama, but deep down he knows he's not really limited by that role.
Exactly. And get this, Krishna reveals that he chooses to reincarnate whenever righteousness is in decline and evil is gaining power. It's like he's this cosmic force for good, always showing up to restore balance when things get out of whack.
Talk about divine intervention.
Yeah.
But if both Krishna and Arjuna have been reborn, why does only Krishna remember? And for that matter, how do we even know if we've lived past lives?
Ooh, those are some great questions. And ones that have puzzled philosophers and spiritual seekers for centuries.
Yeah, I'm not expecting easy answers here.
Honestly, there aren't any easy answers. But Krishna does say that through devotion and understanding his true nature, we can eventually break free from this cycle of rebirth and achieve liberation.
So it's not about remembering the specifics of past lives, but rather realizing our connection to something bigger than ourselves, something divine, and acting accordingly.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from who was I to who am I now and how can I live in alignment with that truth.
Okay, I'm starting to get a sense of the scope here. We're talking about liberation, about breaking free from this cycle of death and rebirth. But how do we actually do that? What are the practical steps?
Well, that's where Jnana yoga comes in, the path of knowledge. This whole chapter is about how that path leads to liberation. But Krishna makes it clear that true knowledge isn't just about book smarts or intellectual understanding.
It's more about a deep gut-level knowing that changes the way you see the world, right?
Right. It's about understanding the nature of reality, the self, and the divine.
So not just knowing things mentally, but actually embodying that knowledge and letting it guide your actions.
Exactly. And Krishna goes so far as to say that this knowledge is the highest form of sacrifice, even more valuable than giving up material possessions.
Whoa, hold up. That's a pretty bold statement. Most people would say giving up their money or possessions is a pretty big sacrifice.
It is, and that's what makes this teaching so radical. Think
Okay.
about it. You work hard for your money, and even when you donate to charity, there's a part of you that might feel a little bit attached to it.
Yeah, I can relate to that. You're always wondering, could I have done something else with that money?
Exactly. But the Gita is saying that pursuing the right kind of knowledge is even more important than that. It's like saying your attachment to stuff is holding you back, but your pursuit of truth, that's what will set you free.
That's a pretty powerful idea. But it also makes you wonder, what is it about this knowledge that makes it so transformative?
Well, Krishna explains that true knowledge burns away the impurities of our actions. It's like a fire that purifies everything it touches.
So it's not that we stop acting altogether, but the quality of our actions changes.
Exactly. We're no longer driven by ego or selfish desires, but by a deeper understanding of our true nature.
This is starting to sound pretty deep.
Hmm.
But if we're all stuck in this cycle of rebirth, isn't it inevitable that we're going to act in ways that create more karma, more attachment? It's like we're trapped in this cycle.
That's where Krishna drops another major truth bomb, the idea of acting without attachment to the results.
Oh, that's a tough one. It's like saying, do your best, but don't worry about whether you succeed or fail.
Exactly. It's about doing what needs to be done, but letting go of the outcome.
Okay, I can see how that would be incredibly freeing, but how is that even possible? Aren't we wired to care about the results of our actions?
It is tough, but it's about shifting our focus from the outcome to the action itself.
So it's not about being passive or indifferent, but about changing your perspective, like focusing on the process rather than the destination.
Exactly, and it's about recognizing that we're not really in control of the results of our actions anyway, but we are in control of our intentions and our effort.
I can see how that shift in perspective could be really powerful. It's like surrendering to something larger than yourself.
Yes, and that's where this whole idea of aligning ourselves with the divine will comes into play. It's about trusting that there's a bigger picture unfolding, even if we can't see it.
Okay, this is all starting to make more sense, but it also sounds incredibly difficult to put into practice. How do we even begin to cultivate that kind of detachment in the midst of all the chaos and drama of life?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and honestly, it's a lifelong practice.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting a quick fix.
Right. There are no shortcuts here. But Krishna does offer some guidance in this chapter. He talks about the importance of seeking knowledge from those who've already attained it, cultivating self-control, and dedicating our actions to a higher purpose. It's about aligning ourselves with the divine, both internally and externally.
It sounds like a pretty radical shift from the way most of us live our lives, where it's all about me, myself, and I.
It definitely is. But remember, the Bhagavad Gita isn't for the faint of heart. It's a call to action, a challenge to step out of our comfort zones and embrace a new way of being.
So instead of being slaves to our ego, we become warriors of the spirit.
Exactly. Fighting for truth, righteousness, and ultimately our own liberation.
I love that image. But it's interesting because we're diving deep into this idea of knowledge as the path to liberation. But in this chapter, Krishna also talks about different paths, different ways of offering sacrifice. What's that all about?
That's where things get really fascinating because it acknowledges that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to spirituality. Krishna uses all these examples. Some people offer their wealth, others offer their senses, some even offer their very lives.
Wait, offering your life as a sacrifice? That seems a bit extreme, even for the Bhagavad Gita.
It is intense. But the key takeaway here is that it's not about the form of the sacrifice, but the intention behind it. What's your attitude? Are you doing it out of ego or as a genuine offering to something greater than yourself?
So even seemingly ordinary things like doing your job well or helping a friend can become a form of sacrifice if you're doing it with the right intention.
Exactly. And that's a pretty empowering idea, wouldn't you say? It means we have the power to make every action, every choice, a step toward liberation.
Okay, that's starting to click for me. But before we go too far down that road, I want to come back to something that's been bugging me. Krishna keeps talking about action and inaction, even though they're literally about to go into battle. How does that even make sense?
That's what makes this chapter so mind-bending. Krishna is pointing out that the relationship between action and inaction is way more complex than we usually think. He even says that wise people understand how action can be a form of rest, and rest can be a form of action.
Okay, now that sounds like a riddle. How can you act and rest at the same time?
It's meant to make us question our assumptions about what those words even mean. Like, are we truly acting if we're just driven by ego and desire? Or is that just a form of restless striving that doesn't lead to real fulfillment? And can there be profound action in stillness, in contemplation, in simply being?
So it's less about the outward form of what we're doing and more about the internal state we bring to it, like whether we're acting from a place of peace or anxiety.
Exactly. And that internal state is directly tied to our understanding, to that knowledge we were talking about earlier. That's what ultimately determines whether our actions bind us to the cycle of rebirth or lead us towards liberation.
This is some seriously deep stuff. But I have to admit, it's also incredibly intriguing. It's like Krishna is offering us this whole new way of seeing the world and our place in it.
Exactly. And that's the power of the Bhagavad Gita. It's not just a historical text, it's a living wisdom tradition that's still relevant today, challenging us to think differently and to live more consciously.
I'm totally hooked. Can't wait to dive even deeper.
Let's do it. There's so much more to explore. You know what's really interesting? It's how this whole conversation between Krishna and Arjuna is happening right on a battlefield. It's like Krishna's saying, even when surrounded by chaos and conflict, there's still a path to inner peace and liberation.
It's kind of a crazy juxtaposition, right?
Yeah.
Swords are clashing, armies are about to collide, and then there's Krishna dropping wisdom about reincarnation and the true nature of action.
It's like, hey, Arjuna, forget the external battle for a second. The real fight is happening within.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a message that's so relevant for us today, too, right? I mean, we might not be facing literal armies, but we've all got our own inner battles to deal with, you know? Doubts, fears, attachments, that constant struggle to find meaning and purpose in a world that can feel pretty crazy sometimes.
Absolutely. And it can be so easy to get caught up in all the external noise and forget that the real battle is happening within ourselves.
Totally. You know, going back to this idea of knowledge being the ultimate sacrifice, it still feels a bit radical, even in our information-obsessed world. We're always chasing the next bit of data, the latest update. But is that really the kind of knowledge Krishna is talking about?
That's a great question, and I think it really gets to the heart of what distinguishes Jnana Yoga from just accumulating information. It's not about having a head full of facts and figures. It's about cultivating a deep understanding of the true nature of reality, the self, and the divine.
So it's more about wisdom than just knowledge. Like knowing something intellectually is different from actually embodying that knowledge and letting it guide your actions.
Exactly. Krishna is talking about a transformative understanding that shifts our entire perception of ourselves and the world around us. It's the kind of knowledge that liberates us from ignorance, delusion, and ultimately from suffering.
Okay, so how do we even begin to cultivate that kind of wisdom? Is it something you're just born with? Or is there a way to access it?
Well, Krishna emphasizes that this wisdom is not something we can simply acquire through intellectual study or mental effort alone. It's attained through a combination of devotion, self-discipline, and seeking guidance from those who have already realized the truth.
So it's about surrendering the ego, letting go of our limited understanding, and opening ourselves to a higher wisdom that's already present within us.
Exactly. And that process of surrender, of letting go of our preconceived notions and biases, can be incredibly challenging. It's like stepping into the unknown, trusting that there's something greater guiding us, even when we can't see the whole path laid out before us.
It's interesting because that idea of surrendering control actually ties back to the concept of acting without attachment to the results. It's like Krishna is saying, hey, you can put in the effort, you can make choices, but ultimately the outcome is not entirely in your hands.
That's a great connection. And I think that's a key part of what makes these teachings so liberating. It's about recognizing that we're not in control of everything, but we can choose to align ourselves with a higher power, a divine will, and trust that everything will unfold as it's meant to.
There's something really freeing about that. It takes the pressure off of always having to make things happen and allows us to focus on doing our best in each moment without getting so caught up in the outcome.
Absolutely. And that's where the concept of karma yoga comes in. It's this idea of offering up our actions as a form of selfless service to the divine. It's not about working for rewards or recognition, but about acting from a place of love, devotion, and a desire to contribute to the greater good.
So it's like every action becomes an opportunity to connect with something bigger than ourselves,
Right.
to participate in this cosmic dance of creation and destruction.
Exactly. And that perspective can transform even the most mundane tasks into acts of sacred service. Whether we're cooking a meal, cleaning our homes, or engaging in our professional work, everything can become an offering if it's done with the right intention.
That's such a beautiful way to look at it. It's like we're constantly being invited to participate in this divine play, to offer up our talents and abilities as a way of contributing to the harmony and beauty of the universe.
I love that image, and it reminds us that even in the midst of our daily struggles and challenges, there's a deeper purpose, a cosmic significance to everything we do. It's about finding that sacred spark in the everyday and allowing it to illuminate our path.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the path of knowledge and the importance of acting without attachment, but there's this whole section in chapter 4 where Krishna talks about creating the 4 castes or social classes. That seems a bit problematic from a modern perspective, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's definitely a passage that requires some careful consideration and contextualization. It's important to remember that the Bhagavad Gita emerged from a specific cultural and historical context, and some of its verses need to be understood within that framework.
So how do we approach those verses today, especially when they seem to contradict our modern values of equality and social justice?
Well, some scholars interpret this passage as referring to a division of labor based on individual temperament and aptitude, rather than a rigid social hierarchy. Others see it as a reflection of the social order that existed in ancient India, but not necessarily an endorsement of it. Ultimately, it's up to each individual to interpret this passage in light of their own understanding and values.
I appreciate that nuanced perspective. It's a reminder that engaging with ancient texts requires a willingness to wrestle with complex ideas and to hold multiple perspectives in mind. It's not about blindly accepting everything we read, but about engaging in a critical and thoughtful dialogue with these teachings.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that makes the Bhagavad Gita so relevant, even thousands of years after it was written. It invites us to question, to explore, and to come to our own understanding of these profound truths.
Speaking of questioning, there's this part where Krishna says even the worst wrongdoers can be saved by the ship of truth. That seems incredibly hopeful, but also a bit confusing. Does it mean there are no consequences for our actions?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of the Bhagavad Gita's message of compassion and redemption. It's not that our actions don't have consequences, but rather that there's always the possibility for transformation and liberation, even for those who have strayed from the path.
So it's not about condoning bad behavior, but rather about recognizing the potential for growth and change in every being.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message, especially in a world that often feels divided and judgmental. It's a reminder that we all make mistakes, we all stumble along the way, but there's always the possibility for forgiveness, redemption, and ultimately liberation.
It's like a beacon of hope, shining a light on the possibility of transformation, even in the darkest of times.
I love that image. And it speaks to the timeless wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita. It's a text that offers guidance and solace for all stages of life. It reminds us that no matter where we are on our journey, there's always the possibility for growth, healing, and liberation.
Okay, I have to admit, all this talk about liberation and breaking free from the cycle of rebirth is pretty mind-blowing. But how does this ancient wisdom actually apply to our modern lives?
That's a great question, and I think it's one that each listener needs to answer for themselves, but I can offer a few perspectives.
I'm all ears.
Well, for one thing, the Bhagavad Gita's teachings on action and inaction can be incredibly helpful in navigating the demands and pressures of modern life. We're constantly bombarded with information, stimulation, and expectations, and it's easy to get caught up in that whirlwind of activity. But the Gita reminds us that true peace and fulfillment come not from external achievements, but from cultivating inner stillness and aligning ourselves with our true purpose.
So it's about finding that balance between engaging with the world and retreating inward, between action and contemplation, between striving and surrendering.
Exactly. And that balance will look different for each individual, depending on their personality, their circumstances, and their stage of life. The key is to find a rhythm that works for you, a way of moving through the world that aligns with your values and nourishes your soul.
That's such a helpful reminder. We're often so focused on achieving external goals that we forget to tune into our own inner needs and desires. It's like we're on autopilot, going through the motions without really being present or engaged in our lives.
That's so true, and I think that's one of the greatest gifts the Bhagavad Gita offers us, a reminder to wake up, to become conscious and intentional in our choices, and to live in alignment with our true nature.
It's like a call to reclaim our power, to step into our full potential as human beings, and to contribute to the creation of a more just, compassionate, and fulfilling world.
Absolutely, and that's a vision worth striving for, wouldn't you say?
I couldn't agree more. But before we get too carried away with our grand visions, let's bring it back to chapter 4. There's this really intriguing part where Krishna talks about undoing as a key part of the path to liberation. What's he getting at there?
That's a fascinating concept, and one that I think is often overlooked. It's this idea that true liberation involves not just doing the right things, but also undoing the negative patterns, conditioning, and attachments that keep us bound to this cycle of suffering.
So it's like we're untangling the knots that keep us stuck, freeing ourselves from the limitations of our past and our conditioning.
Exactly. And this undoing happens on multiple levels. It's about releasing emotional baggage, purifying our intentions, and shifting our perception of reality.
So it's not just about changing our behavior, but about addressing the root causes of our suffering.
Precisely. And this process of undoing can be challenging, even painful at times. It requires honesty, self-awareness, and a willingness to confront the shadows within ourselves. But it's through this process that we can truly achieve lasting freedom and fulfillment.
It makes me think of the image of a sculptor chipping away at a block of marble to reveal the beauty hidden within. The process of undoing is like that we're chipping away at the layers of conditioning and false beliefs to reveal our true selves.
That's a beautiful analogy, and it highlights the fact that undoing is not about self-denial or repression. It's about uncovering our inherent goodness, our true nature, which is already perfect and complete.
So it's a journey of rediscovering who we truly are, shedding the layers of conditioning that have obscured our true essence.
Exactly. And it's a journey that we can all embark on, no matter where we are in our lives. The Bhagavad Gita offers us a roadmap, but it's up to each of us to take the first step and to keep walking the path with courage, compassion, and commitment to truth.
What a powerful reminder. It's like we're all on this grand adventure of self-discovery, and the Bhagavad Gita is our trusted guide, offering wisdom, insights, and encouragement along the way.
Absolutely. And it's a journey that's worth taking, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of all beings.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 4. We've been exploring some pretty mind-bending ideas, reincarnation, selfless action, and the power of knowledge. I'm so ready to keep going with this ancient wisdom.
I know, right? There's just so much to unpack in this chapter.
There really is. We've talked about all these different paths to liberation, but there's this one idea that really stuck with me, this idea that even our understanding itself can be a form of sacrifice.
Oh, that's a good one. It's not something you hear every day.
Definitely not. So how do you see understanding as a sacrifice?
Well, to really understand these teachings, we have to be willing to let go of our preconceived notions, our comfortable beliefs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It's
Yeah.
like admitting that maybe we don't have it all figured out.
Exactly. It requires a certain humility, a willingness to be wrong. You have to be open to having your worldview challenged, shaken up a bit.
So it's like we're offering up our old ways of thinking, surrendering our attachment to being right all the time in order to make space for a new understanding to emerge.
Exactly. You got it. And that can be a really tough process. I mean, it can be destabilizing, even a bit scary to question the things we thought we knew for sure.
Yeah, that's true. It's stepping outside of your comfort zone.
Exactly. But the Gita suggests that this kind of intellectual and spiritual surrender is actually essential for real growth and liberation.
It reminds me of that quote from Galileo. All truths are easy to understand once they are discovered. The point is to discover them. But that process of discovery can be uncomfortable sometimes. It requires us to let go of what we thought we knew.
Totally. And that highlights how we have to play an active role in our own learning and transformation. It's not enough to just sit back and passively absorb information. We have to wrestle with these ideas, challenge them, make them our own.
Okay, so we're actively engaged in understanding and integrating these teachings. But what about those times when we mess up? I mean, we've all been there, right? We know the right thing to do, but we still make a different choice. How does the Gita address that human imperfection?
That's such an important question because let's face it, we're not perfect. And Krishna actually acknowledges that. Remember when he tells Arjuna that even the worst wrongdoers can find liberation through the ship of truth?
Oh, yeah. But how does that work? Does that mean there are no consequences for our actions? Like, do we get a free pass?
It's not about a free pass or escaping the consequences of our actions. It's more about recognizing that there's this divine essence present in all beings, even those who've made serious mistakes.
So it's more about potential. Like everyone has the potential to change and grow no matter what they've done.
Exactly. It's about that spark of possibility that never goes out.
So even when we mess up, we can still turn things around. There's always hope.
Exactly. And this actually ties back to the idea of acting without attachment. We might stumble, we might make mistakes, but the key is to learn from those experiences and let go of the guilt.
It's like, okay, I messed up. What can I learn from this and how can I do better next time?
Yes. It's about progress, not perfection. And that's a much more compassionate and realistic way to approach our spiritual growth, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It takes the pressure off needing to be perfect all the time. Sometimes this whole conversation about liberation and the cycle of rebirth feels a bit abstract. How do we actually make these ancient teachings relevant to our everyday lives? How do we actually apply them in the real world?
Oh, that's the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question. How do we bridge that gap between ancient wisdom and modern life?
Right, because it's easy to get lost in the concepts. But we want to actually live these teachings, not just talk about them.
Exactly. And one way to do that is to look for the echoes of these principles in our own experiences. Have you ever had those moments when you're totally absorbed in something you love, like time just disappears, you're completely present in the flow?
Oh yeah, all the time. For me, it happens when I'm writing, playing music, or even just having a great conversation with someone. It's like everything else fades away.
Yes, exactly. And I think those moments give us a little taste of what Krishna is talking about when he says that action can become rest and rest can become action. It's about finding that perfect alignment where our effort becomes effortless.
So instead of pushing and forcing things, it's about finding that sweet spot, that flow state where everything just clicks.
Yes. And the more we cultivate that inner harmony, the more we find ourselves acting from a place of joy and inspiration rather than ego or fear.
This has been such an amazing conversation. So insightful. We've uncovered so many layers of meaning in Chapter 4.
I know, right? It's incredible how much wisdom is packed into just one chapter of the Bhagavad Gita.
It really is. And, it feels like we've only scratched the surface. There's still so much more to explore. But for now, is there one key takeaway that you hope listeners will walk away with?
If I had to pick one, it would be this. The path to liberation is not a destination, it's a journey. It's about continuous growth and transformation, learning and refining our understanding along the way.
I love that. It's about embracing the whole experience, the ups and downs, the challenges and the breakthroughs.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that each experience, whether it's positive or negative, offers us an opportunity to evolve and move closer to our true nature.
Beautifully said. And ultimately, that journey begins right here, right now, with every choice we make, every action we take.
So true. It's about bringing that awareness, that intentionality to everything we do. And I think as we do that, we start to realize that the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita isn't just something we read about, it's something we embody. It becomes a living, breathing part of who we are.
This deep dive has been a real gift, and I'm so grateful for your insights and wisdom. Thank you so much for helping us to understand this profound chapter of the Bhagavad Gita.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listeners, I encourage you to keep exploring these teachings, to find what resonates with you, and to allow that wisdom to guide you on your own unique journey. Because ultimately, that's what it's all about.
That's right. Until next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the wisdom that's all around us.